Welcome to the Cantina Chatter podcast. Hello and welcome to the Cantina Chatter podcast. My name is Victoria and I will be your host on this galactic adventure through Star Wars, toys and collectibles, pop culture, and randomness from the 80s and 90s. Welcome to July 2020. It's so wild that we're 6 months through the year, and with all that's been going on this year, I feel like we went straight from winter to summer. Who knows what will happen next, honestly. But as long as we're able to, Cantina Chatter will be here to help you get through it with your bi-weekly dose of toy news, history, and nostalgia. But I hope you're doing well, or as well as can be. Yesterday was the 4th of July, and although my own way of celebrating the holiday basically meant working out with my dear friend and enjoying her amazing company over a fun breakfast, it seemed like for all intents and purposes, it was a pretty regular 4th of July, meaning neighborhood parties and illegal fireworks. I drove through the beach and saw that it was packed. Here's hoping people were safe, but well, we can really only watch out for ourselves at the end of the day, right? I did want to thank you guys for the Apple Podcasts reviews. We're at 99 ratings. Who wants to be number 100? Really, guys, thanks. Those stats do help us out, so if you can spare 2 minutes to rate and write a quick review of the show, please do so. Just make sure it's a good one, otherwise you'll be kicked out of the cantina. Anyhow, it's been a while since we did a Q&A episode. With it being the middle of the year, I thought it was a good time to check in with you guys and find out what burning questions you might have. So I did the only thing there is to do in this situation, and I took to the socials to see what you, dear listeners and followers of the Victoria's Cantina YouTube channel, were curious about. Like, what is Victoria's favorite milkshake combination? Is it true that she created all of the music in the Cantina Chatter podcast? Yes, it is. When she's not talking about toys, which is like never, what the heck does she like to do? What are her dreams and aspirations? And as expected, no one asked anything like that. I mean, who would? Anyway, I've rounded up your questions from Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, as well as the fax machine, aka my email, and I'll be going over each of them and making your Q&A dreams come true. So, let's get to it, shall we? So this first question kind of follows up on the last podcast episode I did with Tom Chorlton, who of course is the collecting correspondent for Cantina Chatter. That was our episode about the world going retro and how everything's retro these days and how toy companies are trying to constantly sell us old stuff that we already owned decades ago but are still just as excited about to buy again. It's from Benjamin Irvin, who has also contributed to the podcast in the past, and his question is, what line do you want to see have retro releases next, in the same vein as Hasbro Ghostbusters and Star Wars? Any brand, any manufacturer, end quote. Well, I know this is something that is probably not going to happen. And actually, if you listen to the first episode in season 2 of Collect Jurassic World, which by the way, just came back last week, me and Tim from Collect Jurassic kicked off our first episode of season 2. We talked about how amazing it would be for there to be a Kenner Jurassic Park retro figures, just like they're doing with Hasbro Star Wars, just like they're doing with Hasbro Ghostbusters, and according to rumor, Hasbro G.I. Joe in the not too distant future. And, that is 100% what I would love to see. The Kenner Jurassic Park toys have been going higher and higher and higher in value over the years on the secondary market. It's basically not really attainable to complete a set of that very first Series 1 line of Jurassic Park toys without spending probably well over $1,000. So I know that things would be really murky here because Hasbro no longer has the Jurassic license. They lost it to Mattel. And Mattel doesn't have the ability to use the Kenner trademark. And presumably they don't have the ability to use the aesthetics of that packaging. I know they did something similar for the Comic-Con exclusive John Hammond last year. So maybe they could do something similar to that. But then you get into the actual figures, which are, Kenner figures, basically Hasbro intellectual property. So would Hasbro be okay with Mattel doing that? Would Mattel be okay with Hasbro doing like a retro collection for Jurassic Park? I don't know. I mean, stranger things have happened with toys in the past, so I don't want to say it would never happen. Never say never, but it's unlikely to happen, which is a shame. I think if Hasbro had treated the Jurassic World line the way that Mattel is treating it now and has been over the last couple of years, no doubt in my mind, they 100%, they would certainly be doing a retro line for Jurassic Park, but that's simply not the way things went. So, I mean, I'm hopeful that it can happen, but I wouldn't put my money on it. But that would be it. That would be the one thing I'd want to see happen. And if not that, then, Hasbro has a bunch of Kenner lines they can pull from. Lots of stuff from the Dark Knight collection, lots of stuff from Swamp Thing, all those retro toy lines. I don't think there's a lot of demand for Swamp Thing or maybe even the Dark Knight collection. Yeah, I'd be happy to see those again. I mean, it's Batman. And then, of course, Spin Master is doing the 4-inch Batman figure. So I don't think Hasbro would be able to do that again. So anyway, on to the next question. Classic Action Figures asks, what should be the next Star Wars HasLab product? Well, I really think it's going to be the Death Star. I could be wrong. I know a lot of people are asking for the Razor Crest from The Mandalorian. I know some people want to see the Rebel Blockade Runner. Others want to see a Star Destroyer. I think they're going to follow a formula that they know is going to be successful. If you look back to the Sail Barge, it was a vehicle, but it was also a playset, very interactive thing that had lots of features. It was from the original trilogy. I think for them, that's a pretty safe bet. And also something that has been asked for a long time. Well, the Sail Barge maybe wasn't the most popular idea, like in terms of a marketing perspective, but it was something that the fan community was asking for years. Collectors wanted that Sail Barge for years, and the very first HasLab was funded and was successful. And if you think about it, the Death Star ticks all of those boxes. It would be a vehicle / playset from the original trilogy. It's something that fans have wanted for a long time. So if I had to guess what it would be, and again, I could be wrong. It could be the Razor Crest. It could be something else. I think it's going to be the Death Star. I really do. And honestly, I think that's probably what it should be at this point in time. Cheese on Bread says, my 5-year-old loves all things Star Wars. Aside from a small selection of clearance toys and used stuff on eBay, there's nothing to buy him via traditional line. With no regular 3 3/4-inch figures and vehicles for The Rise of Skywalker, is Hasbro now solely focused on collectors? Aren't we at a point where Star Wars / Hasbro can have core characters and vehicles such as the TIE Fighter, X-Wing, AT-AT, speeders, and make them available on a semi-regular basis, even if it's just repacks? He even looked up the carbon-free set and said, that's all you get. Should we accept that Star Wars toys are just not for kids anymore? And looking at you, the $300 AT-ACT. Well, a little bit to unpack here. So let's start off with that $300 AT-ACT. So I don't think that was really something targeted specifically at like adult collectors. I don't know any adult collectors or longtime collectors that were really stoked about the AT-ACT. Obviously it was like an app-controlled vehicle, and not a lot of people were stoked about that, really. It was very small compared to previous AT-AT vehicles. And just not very detailed. You could barely fit the figures in it. It was it was really small. So I think that was aimed more at being like a holiday season type thing, aimed at like the big Christmas gift that kids would get. And I know some collectors obviously bought it, but it did go on deep clearance. I never got one. It just wasn't my thing. Even on clearance, I didn't really want to spend $80 or whatever they went for it. So I don't think it was intended for collectors. Now, I know we've talked for a while on the podcast about, the state of Star Wars collecting. And yeah, Star Wars is basically a collector focused line at this point, especially when you're talking about Hasbro. They really tried doing the kid thing for The Force Awakens, for Rogue One, The Last Jedi, Solo. And it just didn't work out as well as I think they had hoped. I know that initially, people were really into the toys, especially going back to 2015, The Force Awakens. There was all this hype surrounding Star Wars, and they made a lot of stuff. Well, they made too much stuff, and it just sat, went to clearance, it went to Five Below, it went to, all these other stores, So I don't think it was all that profitable at the end of the day. And as you saw more and more movies come out, like Rogue One, then Last Jedi, then Solo, you saw the toy lines get smaller and smaller. And stuff really was popular in 2015. Remember how popular Rey was? I mean, I don't think I can really fault Hasbro if a lot of those people, many of whom were probably buying toys for the first time, didn't stick around for the following movies and the following product lines. So, I mean, Hasbro really stuck it out there, I think, especially early on with the sequel trilogy and the spin-offs, and the audience, the market, ultimately just wasn't there. And some of those 5 POA figures were really good, and they ended up being pretty hard to get. I still haven't completed like the whole line of like the Solo 5 POA figures. I just haven't gotten around to it because I never saw them at retail. I did find a few of them at Five Below, but haven't gotten all of them yet. But yeah, for the Rise of Skywalker, we're seeing a much more focused thing, and it's all the vintage collection. They didn't want to hedge their bets on another well-rounded 3¾ inch 5 POA style line. So even for Black Series, we only got a handful of Rise of Skywalker figures, and nothing for the rest of the year has even been announced. So yes, Star Wars in the 3¾ inch scale is a collector line at this point. It's all about the vintage collection. They retail at $12.99/$13.99 depending on where you're looking. And a lot of places really aren't even stocking them very well. It's basically an online collection. Just last month in June, 2 episodes ago, I was talking with Chris and Brett from banthaskull.com about the vintage collection and how we haven't seen so many of those figures at retail, and how there have been no reports of a lot of those figures hitting retail at all. So basically it's an online collection at this point. It's an adult oriented collection. And I think that's why you've seen the focus primarily go to original trilogy type stuff. Cause, Hasbro knows where they can make their money. They can always make their money on OT stuff. It's all the long-term collectors that are keeping that line going, people that love that scale and that grew up with that scale. So, I mean, I really wish there was like a 5 POA like line for, the Rise of Skywalker, Mandalorian, or, just something that integrated all the saga like into one toy line that was like, a budget line. That'd be cool. But, I'd rather see the higher quality stuff, the vintage collection and higher quality vehicles. I mean, I know it does mean we're getting less overall, but I think no one can really deny the quality of most of the product we've gotten over the last couple of years for vintage collection. While I do agree that the Cloud City playset does seem to be a bit lackluster, and I'm not really happy with how you have to buy 2 to complete the whole thing. I mean, I sort of get it. They were trying to produce a $50 product. I think it could have been better. I think it could have had the claw, to come down and grab the carbonite. And I don't know. I just feel like it does seem a bit lackluster to me personally. I think a $100 set that had, both parts, the 2 sections of the playset with the claw and with maybe that fog effect that came on the Kylo Ren and Rey Black Series set, the exclusive from Comic-Con a couple years ago. That would have been awesome. But I guess they were trying to hit that $50 price point, just like the Jabba's playset from last year. So we'll see. Maybe it'll turn out to actually be pretty awesome when the product gets here. But yep, It is basically a collector-oriented line. I know they're experimenting right now with those battle bobblers. Have you guys seen those in stores? I've been seeing them at Target for like the past month or so, and they're kind of weird. They're like these little clips with springs that have little figurines on them. They're really weird. And Galaxy of Adventures, I don't know what's going on with that. My Target still has the figures, but they're the old figures. I know that some of the newer ones, like Boba Fett, I believe, were hitting in the UK, but nothing here yet. So that line seems pretty dead too. So, unfortunately, we're not in the golden age of collecting like we were for Star Wars, a decade ago. So yeah, I would say that if I was, advising somebody who, wanted to build up a collection around 3 3/4, I would say, you're on the right track. Keep going back to the Legacy collection, to the Anniversary collection, the Saga collection. There's some great stuff from the 2000s that Hasbro did, for Star Wars. Some of the greatest stuff I think was done between like 2005 all the way to like 2012. There's some amazing stuff there. And there's just so much of it. So that's the good thing. Even though there's not a ton to be had at this point, they really did a lot of great stuff during that era that can be had. And I know a lot of it's expensive, but some of it's not. And you could definitely pick up, some good stuff on eBay. I'd love to see more Rise of Skywalker stuff, though. And I hope that Hasbro isn't done with that movie, because I really love that movie, honestly. I'd love to see more stuff come from it. We're missing a lot of figures in both Vintage Collection and Black Series. Next question comes from RX Gold, who is asking, what is the one dream figure you want from Jurassic? It doesn't have to be plausible or within any price range, and you can have any feature. From Mattel Jurassic, the one thing I would like to have them do, of course, would be the Jungle Explorer. And I don't think that's a secret. We've talked about that a long time. On Collect Jurassic World, on social media, on YouTube. I mean, it's no secret that people want the Jungle Explorer. It's such a prominent part of the original Jurassic Park film. Kenner had a toy for it, and we really need the Jungle Explorer. I think that's the one thing that I'd really love to see, but done right, with opening doors and just an awesomely painted, vehicle that, could fit the figures, just like the Jeep Wrangler. I know they can do it. And if the rumors are true, hopefully it'll eventually happen. That being said, I'd also really love to see a command compound. I mean, the one that Kenner did is amazing. It is amazing. And I think if Mattel did like a good playset featuring some fencing, the Jurassic Park gate, and a visitor center structure, it could be awesome. It really could be awesome. So, I mean, that's what I would absolutely love to see. The Leathery Man asks, do you think Hasbro and Disney have gone a bit overboard with all the different scales and formats in Star Wars? Especially given there is all this new content as well. Go back to 2010, and although we complained about distribution problems, it was just the Legacy Collection or the Vintage Collection and the Clone Wars. A great time to be alive, in my opinion. So I know there are quite a few scales now, but I don't think that's necessarily something that's entirely new. I mean, if you go back to this era that we're talking about here, 2010, yeah, Hasbro may have primarily been focused on 3 3/4 inch during that time, but if you go back a few years before that, well, there was also Unleashed figures. Those were like 7-inch scale. There was also the 12-inch scale. In the late 90s, they were doing the 6-inch Epic Force line. In like 2006 or so, they started making Unleashed figures that were like 2 inches tall, like the really small ones. So I don't think it's anything entirely new. I know that the bread and butter has always been 3 3/4, and now it seems to be that it's 6-inch. So we still have 3 3/4, even though it's not as big as it was before. Presumably because it's not as lucrative as it once was, because costs have gone up, and apparently it costs almost as much to tool up a 3 3/4 inch figure as it does a 6-inch figure. So we have Black Series, we have Vintage Collection, we have Galaxy of Adventures. I don't know if that's continuing, like I said a little while ago with another question, but my Target still has some of them, some of the older ones, so I assume it's something they're still supporting to some extent. And now they have those battle bobblers things. And then they have, the 12-inch like budget figures too. And then, the 6-inch budget figures at certain stores. And then the 4-inch figures at certain stores. So yeah, there's a bunch of different scales for sure. But those last two, you're only going to find those at certain places like Five Below, Family Dollar, places like that. So the reasoning is that there is a market for those. And those are obviously cheaper than, a vintage collection or Black Series figure would be. And we've reviewed those on the channel. I thought they were fun. They may not be necessary for everyone. What I like to say, though, is that when you do have different scales and different formats, if there's something that you're not into, ignore it. Just pass it by. Say, hey, this isn't for me. I can spend more money on this other scale that I do collect. So yeah, they may be producing stuff in various scales, but they're a business. They're trying to see what sticks. Obviously, a lot of us collectors feel like we could tell them before they start selling things like battle bobblers that probably people aren't going to buy those. But that's how it goes with these toy companies. They're always trying new stuff and always trying to be innovative and, just see if they can have a runaway hit. And it doesn't always happen. But I do agree. There's a lot of great content right now for Star Wars. The Rise of Skywalker, The Mandalorian, Clone Wars, and there's not a whole lot of support for that, which is really a shame because I think there's a lot of toy potential in those different series. I mean, there's so much action figure potential there, and the stuff just isn't getting distributed very well, especially with vintage collection. Like I've said over the course of this Q&A session, like a lot of stuff is basically just online, especially for vintage. So it's too bad, but it'll be interesting to see, how things play out as we go forward. If what Hasbro says is true and they're going to put a little more emphasis on vintage in the future, maybe that'll get better for all of us. But we'll have to wait and see, right? Jurassic Tassif asks, what is the hottest Jurassic toy that has come out in 2020? That's a really good question. I know that I feel like during the spring, things are pretty dry. Earlier in the year, we had things that were coming out like the Sarcosuchus. I know that was a pretty popular one. The Tarbosaurus, the Primal Attack Carnotaurus, and a few other things. And then more recently, we're having some of the Camp Cretaceous Primal Attack stuff come out, like the epic Roaring T-Rex, which indeed is pretty epic. And I just reviewed that on the YouTube channel, so please check that out if you haven't already. I think it's Mattel's best T-Rex yet, at least in the 3 3/4 inch scale. I would say that's pretty hot right now. So is the Super Colossal Indominus Rex. I've been seeing that one show up in my social media feeds quite a bit. Even from people that don't collect like a lot of Jurassic, they're definitely going for the Super Colossal Indominus. So I would say it's a toss-up between those two. Maybe the Sarcosuchus. I know that was really popular and it's an awesome toy. Definitely one of the best in the Mattel line, I think. But then we also have things like the Amber Collection, Nedry and Dilophosaurus, and the Entertainment Earth Nedry in the Barbasol can that was put up on pre-order recently. So there's really a lot of stuff that could contend for the hottest Jurassic toy. But I'd say right now, or at least, we're talking 2020, I would say either the Epic Roaring T-Rex or the Super Colossal Indominus Rex. Anakin Prime asks, do you think the Black Series Probe Droid will be scaled down? The Black Series Probe Droid has been out for a few months already, and as far as I can tell, it seems to be in pretty good scale with the rest of the figures. I enjoy mine quite a bit. I don't find the Probe Droid to be necessarily the most exciting thing, but it looks great. It has some posability, and yeah, it's fun. And I do think it's in scale with the rest of the Black Series line. Jurassic Texas asks, what would you like to see in the Jurassic World Dominion toy line? Well, I want the Mattel toy line, like any toy line, I want to see it continue to grow and evolve. I want them to maintain the scale, and I think that they will. I think that they've seen that with this 3 3/4 inch scale, that they've really been able to successfully do the world building the way that Star Wars has for the past several decades, and that they can price different dinosaurs at various price points. I really want to see them continue the world building aspects, though. I think that's what I want to see more than anything. Whether or not that's something they get to later this year or next year for Dominion, that's what I want to see more than anything. And what I mean by that is, I mean not just the dinosaurs, but also the parts of the Jurassic world, so to speak, that are just as equally important. The human figures, the vehicles, the play sets, all that stuff. I also want to see more classic stuff from the original film, even into The Lost World. I'd be totally down with the other films getting some product as well. But I really want to see them build up that first Jurassic Park film, because we still need things like the Explorer. We still need something like the Command Compound that Kenner did with the visitor center, the fences, the Jurassic Park gate. I want to see them do that also for Dominion, though, obviously. Whatever is awesome in that film in terms of world building and dinosaurs, I really want to see that too. And finally, Joshua Banker says, when I decided to bring part of my vintage Star Wars collection to display at my office at work, I thought I would be made fun of because many people my age grew up playing with these toys. It's developed some great conversations and has even helped me connect with executives who have stopped by my office. My question for you is, have you had a similar experience where vintage toys or toys based on vintage properties are far more accepted today than they were just a few years ago? Oh, and thank you for the podcast. Even if I don't collect all the same things as you, I enjoy the love and enthusiasm you have for toys. Well, thank you, Joshua. Obviously, pretty much everything we do on the YouTube channel, as well as most of the stuff we do here on the podcast, involves toys. So I definitely love them. And if anybody caught my recent Ghostbusters Kenner Classics reviews that I did, it was part 1, talking a little bit about the history of the line, as well as looking over the packaging for the figures. And then part 2, which was actually unboxing and reviewing the figures themselves. Then you guys know that my love for toys really got started with the Kenner Ghostbusters toy line. That was kind of the genesis of it all, because we did have a bunch of other toy lines like growing up, like Ninja Turtles and Swamp Thing and Jurassic Park and Batman and Star Wars and Barbie and, all kinds of stuff in the house. But it really got started with Ghostbusters. That's the earliest thing I can remember, really loving. So my enthusiasm for toys definitely goes back a little bit, and it's something that never left me. And to your question as to whether or not I've had a similar experience where I saw that vintage toys or toys based on vintage properties are more accepted today than they were just a few years ago, I would say absolutely. I started the YouTube channel in 2013. I think at the time I was the only female reviewer of Star Wars toys, maybe even DC and Jurassic toys. I mean, there weren't very many of us back then, and thankfully, I've seen more in the years since. Some of them have actually gotten pretty big in terms of their channel sizes. And at somewhere I once worked a while back, I actually did used to display some of my toys at work. Just a few of them, mostly just extra stuff. And Disney used to make these I think they still make them, these die-cast cars for the Disney Pixar movie cars. And where I worked was a radio controlled car, truck company. So, those kind of fit into that whole thing, vehicles, cars. So I had the boxed collection of them. I don't think I had them all, but I had quite a few of them on display there on my desk. And for a time I had some Batman figures and some random figures that, just more modern stuff, but, just random stuff that I wanted to display there at work. And occasionally you'd walk in and find that somebody had gone and posed your figures in weird poses and stuff to kind of mess with you. But I want to say it was maybe 2015 where I kind of saw this sort of change, this sort of attitude towards collectors and especially female collectors. I started seeing a lot more female collectors come to YouTube, come to social media, and maybe they were already into toys and stuff and they just weren't vocal about it. But around 2015, when The Force Awakens was about to come out, that's kind of when I saw things turn around. Nerd culture kind of started going from being nerd culture to being something that was actually widely accepted and was actually pretty cool. Even people that didn't traditionally buy toys or hadn't bought toys since they were kids were getting back into buying the new Star Wars stuff or buying new Marvel figures. So there's people like me that have been doing this, all our lives, but then there's also people that really seem to come on board in, around that time, 2015. I really think that's when it became cool to collect Star Wars toys and to collect toys in general. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think that it's not really looked down upon the way that maybe it might have been, just a few years ago. And I'm really happy to see that. And it's different wherever you go. In Japan, I went to Japan 3 years ago, and it's pretty much strictly adults that buy toys there. And I assume that's been the case for some time. They do have a few Toys R Us stores, and those are basically like the Toys R Us that you have anywhere else. But most of like toys are like, it's a huge collector thing in Japan, just culturally. I think they play a bigger part in adults' lives than they might here, or at least, more than they did a few years back. At least that was my experience when I visited. I just, it was all adults that were in those toy stores. And, they weren't like, some of those toy stores had like kiddie toys too, but they mostly focused on like adult oriented, like expensive toys. Kotobukiya, Gentle Giant, Bandai, Tamashii Nations, all that stuff. But yeah, no, I think definitely it's something that is easier to do now, perhaps, than it was a few years ago. And more girls are doing that too. Girls like toys too, and I'm really happy to see that. Well, guys, that rounds out the questions that you guys sent in. I appreciate them very much. I hope that you've enjoyed this Q&A. And if so, then yeah, we definitely won't wait quite as long to do another one in the future. Thank you to everybody who sent in a question. And if you still have questions, you can continue to send them in, whether it's through social media or the fax machine. You can send in an MP3, victoriascantina@yahoo.com, and we'll play your MP3 on upcoming episodes and answer them accordingly. Remember, you can always reach out, even if it's not for something like this. If you have a question about toys, movies, the content I put out, whatever, always happy to chat toys and these films and TV shows and stuff that we love so much. And that's a wrap for this episode. Victoria's Cantina began on YouTube, and you can find plenty of toy content on the Victoria's Cantina YouTube channel. We are also on Instagram, constantly showcasing toy photography at Victoria's Cantina, as well as Facebook at Victoria's Cantina, and on Twitter, ranting and raving about toys and other nonsense at Vic's Cantina. For fun and random toy clips, follow us on TikTok at Victoria's Cantina. Got a question or something you'd like to share with us? Drop us a line in the fax machine. You can email victoriascantina@yahoo.com. If you are so inclined and wish to drop a coin in the tip jar, we are on Patreon, where you can gain greater access to the channel while helping to keep the content rolling. For VC branded merchandise such as t-shirts, ball caps, mugs, and other fun stuff, visit us on Teespring and TeePublic. Links to all of these magical places can be found in the show notes. Do you got a minute or two? If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star rating and drop a brief review explaining why you enjoy the show. As always, I'm Victoria, and no matter where you're listening out in the galaxy, I'd like to thank you for tuning in to the Cantina Chatter Podcast.